Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caitlin Bassett, and my pronouns are she and her. I am the Senior Lead of Youth and Volunteers with the Invasive Species Council of BC. Today, I'm joining you from the traditional unceded Secwepemc territory, also known as Kamloops. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, for us all to learn how to have a successful BioBlitz in time for the City Nature Challenge, which is happening from April 29th to May 2nd. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please write a note in the chat box and our technical support will be happy to assist you. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a question and it's the same as yours, you can actually upvote it in that same box. Please note when you're using the chat, the default recipients of chat messages are panelists, so make sure you switch it to everyone, so we'll be able to see all of your comments. This webinar is also being recorded and it will be available in a few weeks. We are so excited to be joined by you, and we are happy that you all want to be here today and learn more about contributing to citizen science. Before we start, we'd love to hear where you're from and maybe a fun fact about yourself, so feel free to pop that into the chat. Our presenters today are Allison McCabe and Megan Blackmore. Allison is a science coordinator with the Invasive Species Council of BC. She is an avid naturalist and educator with a Bachelor of Science in Horticulture and a Master's in Land and Water Systems. Allison is passionate about plants, amphibians, and sharing her love of biodiversity data and mapping with the world. We are also joined by Megan, and Megan is a learning coordinator with the Invasive Species Council of BC, and she is a certified horticulturalist and passionate naturalist. She continually strives to find new opportunities to learn and share the beauty and complexity of the natural world with others. So please welcome Megan and Allison.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us today. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, how is that looking? Good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining me and Megan this afternoon. We're very excited to be gearing up for Invasive Species Action Month coming this May with some fantastic community science initiatives, including the City Nature Challenge, which we'll be going over today, sort of the hows and the whys and how to participate. But before we begin, I would just like to take the time to note that the Invasive Species Council of BC gratefully acknowledges the territories of the Indigenous peoples of BC, where we live and work to maintain healthy ecosystems for all. I personally am joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, where I am an uninvited but grateful guest in so-called West Vancouver. And Megan, if you want to give your acknowledgement.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Secwepemc, same as Caitlin into Kamloops, known as Kamloops.
Perfect. So, like we noted, May is Invasive Species Action Month, or ISAM for short. So we thought this year it would be really great to kick it off by participating in the Global City Nature Challenge BioBlitz. A bit of context. Here at the Council, we have a community science network where we focus a lot on building community partnerships and empowering people in BC to get to know the nature around them. And participating in community science is a really great way to help protect BC's biodiversity. And our network has a really good range of resources and connections to help you make an impact and get involved in your own community. So today's webinar is going to be all about how we're involved in this global community science challenge, the City Nature Challenge. So myself and Megan will be going over what that is and how to participate. And then Megan will go into a bit more detail on why gathering this kind of community science data is so important to conservation efforts worldwide. So the City Nature Challenge runs from April 29th to May 2nd. It is a global coordinated BioBlitz. It started in 2016 as just a small friendly competition between San Francisco and LA, but has since grown into an international event, motivating people around the world to find and document wildlife in and around their cities. So now it's run by the community science teams at the California Academy of Sciences and the Natural History Museum of LA. So it's a 4-day BioBlitz at the end of April, always every year, where cities all across the world are in a kind of collaborative, but also friendly competition to see how much data we can gather if we are all doing it at this coordinated time. So this is a BioBlitz for all nature that includes plants, animals, fungi, etc. And of course, another benchmark we're looking at is how many people in every city participate. And in case you're not familiar with the term BioBlitz, we use it a lot. They can be tiny or quite large and coordinated, like the City Nature Challenge. Basically, it's just any community science effort or group effort to record as many species as possible within a designated location and time period. So it can be as long or as short. In this case, it's a 4-day BioBlitz, but you might hear this term in other areas if you're ever involved in community science or anything like that. And here's a map of all the locations for this year. Sorry, it's a little bit small. So as you can see, we are in pretty good company and well positioned to contribute some great biodiversity data. There are a couple different ways to join the challenge. So if you already have iNaturalist, that's great. If you don't, you will have to make an account. So you can join either on the app or on the web browser version of iNat. If you just click on projects and you can search for the City Nature Challenge, there's an overarching project that lets you scroll down and find your city on the map, or there's also a list. And maybe Megan, if you can pop that link in the chat, that might be helpful. It's pretty easy to find though. And then you can also join on the City Nature Challenge website. If you click on participate, then it'll give a list of the cities and the links to the iNat pages to do that. So this is what your projects page will look like on the app. I am coordinating the Chilliwack one, so I've got the Chilliwack one joined here and then some of my other little projects there. And this is kind of a neat project. You don't even, actually, I guess you don't even really need to do this. It's nice to join projects, but you don't need to join them usually, because for this one, the coordinator should have made it so any observation made in the designated map area will be automatically added. So, but it's still, you can always see, it's good to know if your city is doing it or not, and how you can get involved, because some of them have events going on. And just a bit more about iNaturalist, because I kind of jumped into it. Basically, it's a database with community science gathered data of native and invasive species worldwide. So plants and animals, etc., everything you can think of. It was originally developed in 2008 by master's students at UC Berkeley. And now it has 2.5 million users and tons of observations, giving some really great data. It's cool too, because it has an identification tool that's driven by artificial intelligence and community identification. So it's really neat. So even if you don't really know what you're looking at, you can upload it to iNaturalist. The AI should have a pretty good idea of what it is, at least getting it down to the family or genus. And then you can rely on crowdsourced information to drill down to a species level ID, which as long as it meets certain parameters, such as like date, location, good quality photo, it's considered research grade data. And then that can be used by researchers all over. It's really cool. So the app is very simple to use if you haven't used it before. All you need to do is take a photo, identify the species as best as you can. If you don't know what it is, you can just put it as unknown or animal, plant, just very basic, and someone will be able to find it and ID it for you. And your curiosity really in this community science can lead to some really interesting observations. So down here, this is on the app, what it looks like. You can either take a photo directly in the app, or you can upload after the fact from your photo library. And the nice thing about newer phones, you can enable geotagging on your photos. So then the location field is automatically populated, which helps a lot. So this is just a sample of my colleague Megan's, just a few of her many observations. So not only is it kind of fun to track biodiversity globally and regionally, it's also a really good tool for early detection and rapid response of invasive species. And it's great for species abundance, distribution, community interactions, but also it's kind of fun to track your own observations. It's a lot easier than keeping a written list. Some people like to keep life lists of species that they see, and iNaturalist can be really fun for that. The mobile app, so like I said, there's a mobile app and there's a desktop version browser. The mobile app is good for uploading a couple observations here and there, but it might not be the most convenient for uploading large numbers of observations or older photos or non-geotagged photos. So I would recommend getting to know the mobile app and the browser version. And the browser version does have quite a bit more functionality. So yeah, especially for a BioBlitz, if you're taking like a couple hundred photos, probably easier to do it in the browser. There are other reporting apps that I just wanted to mention. So although iNaturalist is the one that we are focusing on for the City Nature Challenge, we also have our very own provincial app, which is called Report Invasives BC. And it is really just it's basically like an invasive species hotline, and I think I have more info, yes. So it's only for invasive species, and what happens when you make an observation on Report Invasives, it goes directly to an invasive species specialist at the province. So that is very helpful for them. There was a Daphne laurel I observed on this, and I got a call the very next day from one of the staff at the province saying that they had never seen Daphne laurel in that area and they were going to go check it out. So it's well monitored, definitely worth it. Even if you're uploading invasives to iNat too, if you could also upload them to Report Invasives, that helps a lot. So yeah, for this one, it's a lot easier to use than iNaturalist. Not that iNaturalist is especially difficult, but Report Invasives was designed to be very user-friendly. So all you need to do is you have your photo, you select the category of what it is. So it's very broad, like fish, bird, insects, and spiders. You'll take the photo, you can add details and notes like how large the infestation is, if applicable, and then you just click submit. The nice thing about this app is it records your current location. So it's better to submit in the field. If you submit after the fact, it won't take the location data, but it's also got offline functionality. So you can click submit and it will save the information, but it won't send it off until you've got Wi-Fi or data, which is good if you're out in the sticks. So do try to use this app as well as iNat. So yeah, that was my very fast and furious introduction to community science and the City Nature Challenge, like I said, which is happening April 29th to May 2nd. But I'll now pass it over to my colleague Megan, who will tell us why this kind of data is so important and show some cool examples from our community science research.
Thanks, Allison, for that. So you go to the next slide. So definitely your observations contribute a lot of data to all sorts of different research, all sorts of different different things that can help us track invasive species, track biodiversity of native species. Definitely an important thing is early detection and rapid response. This is tracking invasives that aren't established here yet. So we're still waiting for them, and well, not wanting to wait for them to come here, but we they're potentially going to be a threat to come to our area, and so we're watching out for them. And definitely all of your observations that you add potentially of these species can really help us track and find those first initial insects or plants that are coming here, and we can act on them very quickly, so we can hopefully stop them from establishing and becoming a problem in our area. An example of community science that contributed to this was this observation of elm zigzag sawfly. This is the very first recorded observation of it in North America. This person added this observation onto iNaturalist, just not knowing exactly what it was. They put maybe it's a butterfly or moth, not really sure. And they ended up getting a lot of responses from people who were experts in the field and knew this insect, saying like, this is the very first time we've seen this in North America. And so from that, they knew to start looking in that area for this insect so that they could start responding to it before it became a really large problem. Next slide, please. There's also been a lot of times when people have found new species, new invasive species in their area, like that elm zigzag sawfly, that maybe we're still on the same continent, at least, unlike the elm zigzag sawfly, but they're just not known in that area in particular. So this community science is really contributing to our knowledge of where these species are and how they're spreading. It's really exciting when you find information like this, just finding a species like out of its range in new areas, new species, especially new to you, that are really substantial contributions to the scientific community. It's a pretty amazing thing. So it's really fun to get out there and see what you can see and see what you might discover. So your photos are contributing really valuable data to the scientific world. Your photos can contain information that could be used by researchers. For example, here is someone that was interested in visually assessing amphibians and reptiles and their health in urban environments. And without them having to get out and take hundreds of photos themselves, they had a community of people who were already contributing this data for them to look at. Next slide. Data about ecological interactions can also be captured in your photos, which is really interesting. As shown here, these birds are feeding on introduced invasive species. This gives us new knowledge not only about invasive species distribution, but how they're interacting with our native species in our ecosystems. Next slide, please. This data can be used to inform invasive species priorities and management plans as well. Shown here is iNat observations over the years of brown marmorated stink bug. This data helps us to watch where these invasives are spreading, where they're popping up, because we have so many eyes on the ground, so many people looking for different things that we're going to be able to find them faster than just a few experts looking as much as they can. Next. Community science is providing so much valuable biodiversity data all across the globe and helping out research in so many different areas. Next. And also all of this really interesting iNaturalist data, it's not only available for researchers, you can explore it as well. When you go to the Explore page on the desktop platform of iNaturalist, you see this world map showing all of the observations in the world on iNaturalist. You can search any specific species or taxonomic levels that you want to look at. You can set the location that you want to search within, whether it be all of Canada, just BC, or even just your own city, and see what's there. You can also, through the filters tab, you can add all sorts of other specifics to your search, like introduced or threatened species. I really encourage you to play around and see what you can discover on there and see what you're contributing to. Next. Through the desktop platform, as Allison mentioned before, it's really easy to upload and edit multiple observations at a time. It can be a little bit tricky on the app when you're adding lots at a time, although the app is really good for field observations and adding just a few here and there. If you're adding lots of observations, say after you've been out on a hike or all day and you've taken lots and lots of pictures, it's a great way to just add them all really quickly, especially if you have a DSLR camera, something that you're already loading onto your computer anyways. You can just upload it right from there and And also, like Allison mentioned, if you have to tag your locations, it's much easier to do that through the desktop version. And it'll add all of your observations together, so you don't have to keep adding every single location individually. When you bring up the next observation after you've done one, it'll already know kind of the location that you were in, so it gives you a starting point. So it's just a lot quicker and easier. Next. iNaturalist also allows you to choose different location data settings. You can do this on the app and on the desktop version, either way when you're uploading your observations. Open means that it leaves a precise pin on the map where the observation was made. Obscured means it'll place a generic marker in the general area, somewhere around, I believe it's about 22-kilometer range, kind of around that precise location, but it's not going to actually show people that exact location. They just have a general idea of where it was. Private will not show any location data at all. The only indication that anyone could possibly get about your location of that observation is through your time zone and any notes that you actually make in it. I do encourage people to add the obscured markers to any observations, especially if you're around your house. Keep in mind, though, that location can be necessary for ID. So using that private function, definitely it is very private, but it can, it makes it a little bit harder to sometimes get IDs and also to be able to use it in research, just because the location is very important. But definitely make sure you're obscuring it when it's by your house. There's a few people on iNaturalist that I know exactly where they live now, because they have a lot of data points right around their yard. So just keep in mind your privacy, and whatever you're comfortable with, make sure you add that note to it. Next. Also, when uploading, again, as Allison mentioned, it's important to give your observation just any taxonomic standing that you are able to give it, no matter how broad it is. Even if it's just plant or animal, that's a great starting point. The community will then suggest finer and finer identifications and get you to that species point without you just having to guess. Now, you can leave it as unknown, but it's a little bit less likely to be looked at. So it's best to at least put plant, animal, bird, just kind of those really generic things that are easy enough to, usually you can tell what they are. Sometimes things are a little bit weird and you can't always tell even what it is to start with. But especially people who are very experienced with specific groups of, say, animals or birds, they'll often filter their searches by those broad kingdoms. For example, I know plants very well, but I really don't know insects or birds or fungi very well. So I'll search just plants. And unfortunately, any observations that were uploaded as unknown, I'm not going to see in those in that search. So try to give it just the most narrow taxonomic standing that you possibly can. But it's okay if you don't really know what it is. Just do your best, and everyone in the community will be able to help you out. Next. And also, as Allison mentioned, there is AI that will help suggest what your observation may have been about. It's impressively good at times, but do take it with a grain of salt. For example, here's a observation by one of our coworkers, Stephen, who he observed a Scotch broom plant with the seed pod on it. And the AI was absolutely convinced that it was a chameleon or a seahorse, which of course it was not. So definitely when you're adding your observations, think about what it's suggesting and if it makes sense, first of all. You can also click the view tab on the side that will allow you to look at some more information, some more photos of what is being suggested. So you can do a bit of comparison and just see if it makes sense. And just do whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you're sure it is to whatever level. And people will help you out with the rest of the identification. Next. And also make sure that you're not just agreeing with IDs right away if you don't know what they are, just to get them to research grade, because it's really nice to get your observations to research grade, but do make sure you're confident in your identifications and what lookalikes there could be before just agreeing with it, because people are human. They make mistakes. People won't always know exactly for sure what it is, and they may put a wrong identification. You'll want to make sure that you wait until either you know exactly how to ID it properly, you do know that that is the correct ID, or you have other people who are experienced and can add that for you. And also keep in mind that the length of time that it takes to get an ID it can really vary a lot. So do be patient. Sometimes they're instantaneous, like birds typically are ID'd very quickly. Birders are usually really on those ones. Plants, are a couple days usually, I find. But things like insects and fungi that not as many people are really experiencing can take a lot longer. And sometimes you may not get an ID, unfortunately. Or it may even be years later. There's definitely been some observations that I've come across that were made years ago, and I've added an ID to it. So that person, it seemed like they weren't ever going to get an ID, but you may eventually. But it's important to just make sure that your observations are only getting IDs if you're sure that that is what they are. Sometimes photos don't have enough detail or just certain information that's not there, and it's not possible to make it an ID. So just make sure that IDs are only made when it's for sure that species. Next slide. iNat observations do have different observation grades based on the included information and level of identification. So casual means your observation is either missing important information such as the date or location, or it can mean an organism observed is not wild, such as a plant grown in a garden or a pet. Make sure your observations of these things are marked down as captive or cultivated, so they're not marked as wild. It kind of helps with just making sure that the data is correct, that when people pull from it, that for research projects, they're not getting a whole bunch of people's garden plants and they're trying to look at native biodiversity. Needs ID means that your observation has not yet been identified to the species level and agreed on by enough people. It's just waiting for more confirmations of what the species is. And research grade means that your observation has been identified to the species level, and the majority of users have added IDs that agree with the identification. And again, don't agree with IDs just to get them to research grade unless you're sure. This example on the right is a muskrat that's a bit infamous on iNat in our community because it was a student's project where they were just out doing iNat observations for their class. They observed this muskrat, but they identified it incorrectly as a beaver. And then their classmates went on and all agreed it's a beaver, not knowing actually what it is. So there was a whole bunch of people that agreed that it was the wrong species. And the community then had to add so many IDs after that to get it out of that research grade and off of that incorrect ID so that it was correct. And it's been this whole thing for years, actually, this observation, which is a bit crazy, where it's gone back and forth so much. So really just make sure you're only IDing things when you're sure of what it is. Next. And also the quality of your observation is key to contributing useful data and getting to that species level ID. Trying to get as close up and in focus pictures as possible, but without disturbing the organism. You don't want to be like getting right up into something and scaring it, possibly harming it. Just get as close as you can in respect with whatever it is that you are observing. Also, a size comparison can be really helpful for ID. It can help. Certain species need that size to a characteristic known to be able to make sure that that is the species. So that's a great thing to add to your observations. Multiple photos and angles is also great. Getting all sorts of different characteristics and features. Just make sure you have as much kind of detail with it. And also, of course, having a photo in the first place and the location are crucial to getting that observation ID'd. You can upload observations onto iNat just to kind of note like the things that you saw without a photo, but they're not going to get to research grade. They're not going to contribute as much to the scientific community. Next. And keep in mind that photos like here on the left are very difficult to get identifications from. It's really hard to see the detail. There's other species kind of shown here, and it's really difficult to see what exactly that is. So photos like those on the right are much more helpful and easier to ID from. Some species also can't be told apart without being able to see some really small kind of up close specific details. So just make sure that you're really looking for as many features as you can. You may also sometimes need like a combination of multiple details. So not just the cones, you may also need the leaves or the bark with it. You may need the flowers and the stem to get an accurate ID. Just take a picture of as many features as you can so you have a lot of details to get those proper IDs. Next. You'll also, of course, have some things that you'll want to bring with you when you're observing. Of course, a phone or a camera is going to be crucial to be able to get those photos. Also, as I mentioned, for like a size comparison, a ruler or coin for scale is very handy. I keep a little just like 6-inch ruler in my bag, so it's easy to just pull out and either take a picture of it with the organism that I'm taking a picture of, or just to note what the size was, and I can add that in just in written notes into the observation. Hand lens or binoculars is also great just for observing more up close. Of course, remember your boot brush so that as you're observing all this beautiful nature, you're not tracking invasive species to new places and spreading them around. And of course, also remember safety gear. Have a first aid kit, have water, a whistle, having a GPS, different communication devices, just making sure that you're being safe and you're prepared for anything while you're out and observing. Next. And remember that no observation is worth risking your safety for it. And make sure that you hike with a buddy. Try not to hike alone. It's so much safer. Tell people where you're going so that they know where they can find you if something were to go wrong. Stay on designated trails so you're not getting lost, and also so you're not trampling on organisms and harming the environment that you're observing. And remember, of course, have fun and enjoy connecting with nature. That's what this is all about. Next. And also, of course, make sure that you're connecting with us on social media through your journey of observing all this nature. We're leveling up our social media presence this year, promoting lots of awesome projects and organizations that engage in environmental stewardship. You can connect on social media using the hashtag BC Invasives. And also you can use the hashtag City Nature Challenge during the BioBlitz. You can join our community science network and you'll receive our monthly community connections e-newsletter, which is full of information, updates, and fun activities. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope you learned lots and are inspired to contribute to community science. We'd love to answer any questions you have now.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks, Allison, for that great presentation. I really enjoyed seeing a few different observations and hearing about some stories. So we do have a few minutes for questions. So I'm just going to go through the Q&A box, and I believe there's a question in the chat. So the first question is reporting sightings of the European Schaefer beetle futile?
I mean, of course, there's lots of it out there and people observing, but all observations are contributing to community science. We definitely want you to observe anything that you're seeing. It all can be useful. So definitely whatever you find, observe and report it.
Great, thanks, Megan.